Das Schutzhaftdezernat konnte nicht sachlich entscheiden, das war nur eine verlängerte Registratur gewesen. Deswegen hat man ja auch dort keinen Regierungsrat hingesetzt, sondern nur einen Regierungs- und Kriminalrat. Er gehört aber nicht zur höheren Laufbahn, soll es heißen. Ja. Ich war natürlich mit in erster Linie verantwortlich. Ich musste auch die Sache prüfen lassen durch meinen Sachbearbeiter, unter welchen Gesichtspunkten der Jude eingeliefert werden kann und nicht eingeliefert werden darf. Es wurde später aus Einfachheitsgründen so geregelt und wir brauchten nur noch zu zeichnen, denn es waren ja Dutzende von Fällen gewesen. Ja.
Haben Sie das gesagt?
In dieser Form weiß ich nicht, ob ich das gesagt habe. Es ist zum Teil sachlich, sogar richtig, und zum Teil ist es unrichtig. Das kann ich dazu sagen. Ich habe es ja zum Teil sogar selbst hier ausgesagt, wie es sich zugetragen hat. Und die sachliche Richtigkeit ergibt sich aus den amtlichen Akten.
Translation of the quote.
To what extent I had any share at all in the concentration camps? Well, as department head of 4B4 in the office of the secret police, the Gestapo, that is the question. Well, first of all, until that time, when the Gestapo, rather during that period, when the Gestapo still had to make decisions about individual cases, that is to say up to the end of 1941, that was the period chiefly concerned, because then we received orders to act summarily. And from that point onward, we received the orders of the Führer for the total physical extermination. During that first period, there existed, on behalf of the Reichsführer, and let's take this back to the time when the first concentration camps were set up, but anyway, in that period when all these big people were still rather little men, directives were issued which subsequently were developed and processed even more, and they were carried on. Some of them were even revoked, so that there resulted an official list of measures which must be taken when, for instance, a certain Jew would be caught in an offense such as desecrating the German race, or in relations which violated the German race, and the Gestapo would learn of his name, or when a Jew would be caught in smuggling foreign currency, and so on and so forth. That is to say, offenses in various spheres of life of the German people. There existed regulations and decrees about such matters. They had already been in existence, or else the Reichsführer would complete these regulations. Sometimes he would cancel a certain ordinance or add another one. There were only very few cases, very few points in the whole matter of enemies where the Reichsführer wormed himself into the details to such an extent as he did in Jewish affairs. It was enough for him to get a hint, for the Reichsführer to get a hint over the dinner table from some Gauleiter or some other person about some kind of a case, a transgression, and the Reichsführer would immediately enter into this matter and would give his most personal order about this. This order often contradicted existing regulations issued by himself too. These matters were all ordered by law. Thus, the Gestapo, for instance, or a local headquarters of the state police would write to the Gestapo headquarters and say, such and such a Jew did this and that, performed this and that act, committed this and that offense. It is proposed to send the man to a concentration camp, and the state police local headquarters would like to have instructions. This request would come to my office. We would deal with it. My government counselor or one of my police commissioners would do that, Mös, or I don't remember the other man's name. They would deal with this matter. They would check the matter to see whether it was all right, whether the man could be sent to a concentration camp, or whether perhaps there was not a regulation to cover that. And then it was decided, yes, fine, to send the man to a concentration camp in accordance with such and such regulation from the Reichsführer of such and such a date. Then we would write back to the state police headquarters in the field, telling them, yes, this Jew, such and such a Jew did so and so, Mr. XYZ did ... Now, this letter from 4B4 did not come from the chief of the bureau and go directly to the, let's say, Munich State Police headquarters, and that they would then have to transfer the Jew to such and such a place. No, a draft of such a letter went to the Department of the Protective Custody Police in Bureau 4. There was some kind of a government and criminal affairs counselor in charge. This man had to sign the paper himself, or else he took it to the chief of the bureau for signature. And he only gave the proper instructions downwards to his subordinates. Generally, the matter went later went through the central archives of Bureau 4, and all these letters which reached the Gestapo office from subordinate authorities or even from higher authorities were immediately transferred by the archive people to the special box of this Department for Protective Custody, and not to our box, the box of 4B4. So this man, this criminal and government and criminal affairs counselor, received these things in the first instance and dealt with them just as my department would have dealt with them. And then myself or my permanent deputy would only have to give a counter signature. That is to say, we would only have to authorize that we had no objection, to confirm that we had no objection. The Department for Protective Custody could not make decisions to the point in such cases. It was only a matter of archives. They were only dealing with it from the archives point of view. That's why the man who was there was somebody of the relatively low rank of government and criminal affairs counselor. This man was not one of the senior officials. I, of course, was responsible first and foremost. I also had the task of checking the matter. My own employees had to investigate this very quickly, and if they could not, they would just have to check whether the man could be sent to a concentration camp, this Jew, or not, and what regulations should be used. And then for of simplicity and efficiency, all I had to do was look it over and sign it, because of course there were scores of such cases, and I could not go in detail into every one in person.
Are these your words?
I don't know whether these were the words which I used, I can't remember this, but the contents are partially correct and partially they are not correct.
Yes.
But in part I have testified about this here.
Yes, in part.
It also transpires from the official documents.
We are coming to the end of this chapter. In the same matter, there are also many corrections on pages 246, 247. You will agree with me that there are many corrections and actual additions of many words made by you. For instance, the words, ich weiß die genaue Referaten, etc., etc., I do not remember the correct marking of a certain department.
Aber ich frage mich, das sind Teile, für die ich überhaupt keine Gewähr übernehmen kann, weil ich es nicht weiß. Warum fragt man mich nicht zu Teilen, wo die Korrekturfahnen vorliegen? Es sind insgesamt 200 Korrekturfahnen hier. Das wäre wenigstens etwas genauer und etwas, sagen wir mal, nachprüfbarer. Diese Sachen kann ich ja überhaupt nicht einmal nachprüfen, weil die Fehlerquellenmöglichkeiten zu gewaltige sind, abgesehen von den Umständen, die ich vorhin geschildert habe.
Yes, but these are the parts which I cannot accept and cannot vouch for their veracity. Why am I not shown these parts where there are the correction slips? There are about 200 such correction slips. From them one could get a much better picture. One can check this. I have no way of checking it now without seeing these correction sheets, as I have explained before. There were serious mistakes.
We heard this before. Now, after all your reservations, will you read the passage I marked?
Jawohl.
Jawohl, yes.
Damit fiel für den Schutzhaftdezernenten
bei uns im Amt 4.
Ja, es ist nur aus dem Zusammenhang gegriffen, deswegen habe ich mir erlaubt zu sehen, was davor steht.
כן, זה רק בלי הקשר, לכן הרשיתי לעצמי לראות מה כתוב לפני כן.
כן.
Jawohl. Damit fiel für den Schutzhaftdezernenten bei uns im Amt 4, das war das Referat 4a und so weiter, ich weiß die genaue Referatsbezeichnung nicht mehr.
Das ist in Ihrer Handschrift.
Das ist meine Handschrift, jawohl.
זה בכתב ידך, כן? כן.
Yes, yes.
Ja, bitte weiter.
4b4, das war die Unterabteilung meines Referates gewesen. Ich hatte die Unterabteilung 4b4a und 4b4b. Das ist ein Kauderwelsch, dieser ganze Satz. War also...
Was war A?
Was war
A?
A?
What is the
Der
meaning
eine,
of A?
4b4a, war der Regierungsrat Suhr. Das stimmt auch wieder nicht, wie ich festgestellt habe. Und nach seinem Abgang Regierungsrat Hunsche. Und 4b4b war Günther mit Personalunion seiner Eigenschaft als mein ständiger Vertreter.
Ja.
Yes, carry on.
4b4a war die Feststellung der Volks- und Staatsfeindlichkeit, die Aberkennung der deutschen Staatszugehörigkeit, Beschlagnahmung des Vermögens, das heißt also die Staatspolizeileitstelle X beantragte an das Reichssicherheitshauptamt gemäß einer Durchführungsverordnung der Reichspräsident zum Schutz für Volk und Staat, die Feststellung der Volks- und Staatsfeindlichkeit für den Juden Y, nicht nur für Juden, es war ja der Kreis, der dieses Gesetz des umfasste, ein Gesetz, das später noch erweitert wurde durch Zusatz und Zusatzerlass. Die Feststellung der Volks- und Staatsfeindlichkeit und die Aberkennung der deutschen Staatszugehörigkeit und danach kam dann automatisch, wenn alles stimmte, die Beschlagnahme des Vermögens. Und dieser Betreffende konnte das KZ oder die Reichsgrenze längst verlassen haben. Er konnte aber auch, da er noch im Reichsgebiet gerade eben in dem Verwahrsam der Polizei übergegangen sein. Nun hat die Staatspolizei genau im Einzelnen geschildert, warum sie diesen Antrag auf Feststellung auf dem Dienstweg gibt, unter ausführlicher Begründung, warum dieser Namensträger unter dieses Gesetz zu fallen habe und so weiter. Da war in der Regel mit der Abschrift des Vernehmungsbogens, mit der Abschrift der Vernehmungsbogen beigefügt, oder es war in einem Schreiben diese Vernehmungssache fast vollinhaltlich wiedergegeben. Was der bearbeitende Sachbearbeiter, diese Sachen wurden nur von, diese Sachen wurden nur von Juristen bearbeitet. Diese Sachen wurden nur von Juristen. Nur von Juristen bearbeitet, mit dem Rahmenpersonal, das diesen Juristen zur Verfügung stand. Und zwar immer ein Regierungsrat und als Leiter ein Assessor. Als Suhr Regierungsrat war Hunscher Assessor. Als Hunscher Regierungsrat wurde, kam ein Assessor, da habe ich einen Kreis gemacht mit einem 38er, Ziffer 38, also Fahnenkorrektur 38. Ja. Hinzu ein Rheinländer, und die hatten nun ihr zuständiges Personal. Es war eine routinemäßige Arbeit.
Ja. Haben Sie das gesagt?
Ich werde den Inhalt gesagt haben, aber man sieht schon den Kauderwelsch hier, der dann zusammengebraut worden ist. So ist es immer. Es ist hier nun, ist mir diese Sache nicht aufgefallen, ein Wörtchen, ein oder kein, ein Wörtchen nicht ausgelassen oder falsch dazugegeben, ergibt einen völlig anderen Sinn.
Accused reading another quotation. This applies to the department head, to the head of the Department for Protective Custody in our Bureau number 4. It was Department 4A and something something. I don't remember the exact notation, the exact sign.
This is in your handwriting, is it?
Yes, it is. Now, 4B4, this was the new serial number identifying my department, because we had departments 4B4A and 4B4B. Well, now, this is all baloney, this is all nonsense. 4B4A, that was Government Councillor Zur, it says here. Well, that too is nonsense, I can say that right here. And then it says here, when he left the office, it was Government Councillor Hunche, and 4B4B, that was Günther, and there existed a personal union here in this job with his being my permanent deputy. 4B4A was the department which had to establish the fact of hostility to the state and the nation. The question of depriving people of their nationality, confiscation of property, yes, that was the following way. A local state police office would make a proposal, would send it to the head office of Reich Security in accordance with certain ordinances issued by the Reichspräsident in that area on the basis of the decrees for the protection of the state and nation, would propose that such and such a person would be declared an enemy of the state and the nation. If this applied to, this was only with regard to Jews. If it was about non-Jews, there was another law applicable to this. This other law was subsequently extended, and there were auxiliary ordinances issued. And such a definition of a person being an enemy of the state and of the nation, and the revocation of his nationality, that would be automatic thereafter if everything was all right. And then, of course, his property would be confiscated also. And then the man could have a long time ago left the concentration camp or the area of the Reich. Sometimes maybe not. Sometimes maybe the man stayed behind in the Reich and was in protective custody by the police. Anyway, The state police would give an exact description of each and every detail, why it proposed to do this through the service channels, why they make the proposal to declare the person an enemy of the state and the nation, and why this law should apply to this or that Jew. On the whole, they would also add to their proposals a detailed questionnaire about the confiscation of property, or in the letter itself they would reproduce verbatim the contents of this interrogation. Now the competent member of the department who dealt with this had to be a jurist, because only the jurists dealt with this. And these legal people always consisted of one government counselor and one assessor. The government counselor was the director. When Sur was the government counselor, Sur was the assessor. And then when Hunche was the government counselor, we had the new assessor. Yes, I want to say that here I made a correction, a notation about a correction number 38, and that shows that this referred to a correction slip number 38. Now the quotation goes on. This new assessor was somebody from the Rhine area, and these people were the competent officials to deal with these matters. It was all routine work.
Did you say that?
Yes, content-wise, I did say it, but one can already see here that this is all deficient and all twisted. This is all nonsense at many points. This is how it recurs all the time. Sometimes the word one becomes none, or the entire word no is taken out, and this distorts the entire meaning. You have the word nicht, the word no, and this is omitted, and then the entire meaning is changed, and something quite different comes out. It's all distorted.
Now, at this stage, I will ask you to read what you gave to the men in your office. There are many corrections in your handwriting. Turn to page 226 at the top of the page. President of Court, is this the last quotation? Mr. Hausner, yes. Is it a long passage? Mr. Hausner, no, it is quite short, 3 small passages. President of Court, all right. Mr. Hausner, it is regretted, but the things are important. Turn to page 226. There is a correction at the top. 227. There is a correction at the end of the page. An addition of a few words in your handwriting, and before that as well. On page 221, correct. On page 223, there are 2 numbers signifying remarks made by you. Is all this correct?
Es gibt sogar auf 222 Korrekturen von einer fremden Handschrift, die ich eben sehe.
On page 227, I see corrections in a strange handwriting.
Mr. Hausner, I shall never require that you take responsibility for corrections made by someone else, only for your own corrections. Now turn to page 226, the 4 lines you wrote about Ginter.
Eine Sekunde, bitte.
1 second, please.
Yes.
Denn Günther personifizierte die Härte. Und ein Weichling wie Wislicenyi und auch Krumay behagten Günther nicht. Günther ist einmal halb totgeschlagen worden von der Landespolizei.
Da haben Sie etwas hineingeschrieben.
Ja, da habe ich etwas, aber das kann ich nicht lesen.
Thüringischen, nicht wahr?
Ah, Thüringischen, jawohl,
Ja.
das kann sie. Von der thüringischen Landespolizei. Ich lese nur während, über während ist was drüber geschrieben. Während der Machtergreifung.
Vor der Machtergreifung.
Ah, vor der Machtergreifung.
Mit Ihrem Handschrift doch.
Und, ja, ich ist nur nicht durchgekommen hier.
Ja, bitte.
Und saß dann mehr in Gefängnissen, als er in Freiheit lebte.
Ja.
About
Günther, it says here that Günther personified toughness, and he did not care for people like Krumay or Wislicenyi, who were softies, who were milksops. Günther almost got killed once. He was beaten half dead by the state police in Thuringia. That was before Hitler came to power, and after that Günther spent more time in jails than he did on the outside.
You here described Wislicenyi, Krumay, Abromai. Will you please read it?
225, letzter Absatz, ja?
Ja, ja.
Wislicenyi, Krumay, das soll wahrscheinlich Abromait heißen, Adolait.
Ja.
Richter waren Leute, die ich erst überzeugen musste oder versuchte sie zu überzeugen, die nicht alles hinnahmen, wie es befohlen war. Das eine Wort ist nicht lesbar, die immer noch ein, wenn oder ein Aber hatten, was nicht nur mich, sondern auch meinen ständigen Vertreter Günther in Berlin zum Überdruss verstimmte. Günther selber, den ich in diesem Fall als Zeugen anrufen muss, wird es mir bestätigen.
Er selber.
He himself.
Er selber in Einzeldurchführungsmaßnahmen, mit denen er ja betraut war, dass er, es ist nicht lesbar, GR mit diesem Personenkreis große Schwierigkeiten hatte. Und wenn ich jetzt so recht bedenke, muss ich Ihnen sagen, dass Wislicenyi ihm den Dulder und Erleider nie sympathisch gegenüberstand.
Okay.
Was?
Yes.
Das
President of court.
Das ist durcheinander, hat keinen Sinn, dass Wislicenyi ihm, dem Dulder und Erleider, nie sympathisch gegenüberstand.
Was
hat
sollte
keinen Sinn.
sein?
What should it be in your opinion?
Es ist sinnlos, denn es heißt, muss ich Ihnen sagen, dass Wislicenyi ihm, also Günther, dem Dulder und Erleider, Günther war ja kein Dulder und Erleider gewesen, nie sympathisch gegenüberstand. Das hat die Schreibkraft wieder durcheinander gemurkst, irgendwie nicht.
The quotation, Wislicenyi, Abromait, that's what it must be. Adelait and Richter were people whom I always had to try to persuade and coax, because they did not reconcile themselves to everything and did not acquiesce in everything which they were ordered to do. They always had another remark to make. They always wanted to have the last word. Like they would say, but, yes, however. And this made me mad, and not only myself, but also my permanent deputy Günther. This drove us nuts. I'll have to call on Günther to back me up on this. He'll confirm my words. He himself, was in this position when he had to carry out orders, always had difficulties with this type of people, with this group of persons. And if I try to think about it now, I must tell you that Vyslitseny never had any sympathy for that other person who was so tolerant towards him. And after being asked to explain this, the accused adds, "No, this does not make sense, because Vyslitseny certainly was not a person who, Günther was not a person who would take offenses and insults lying down. He did not show such toleration. This is all a big mess made by the typist who took this down."
Now the last two passages I read out to you, did you understand them more and something of the kind?
Ähnlich mag es schon gelautet haben, aber wenn ich das so lese, überhaupt die ganzen Absätze, dann kann ich mich des Eindrucks nicht verwehren, als würde ich Josef Filzers Briefe oder eine andere Ludwig-Thoma-Geschichte lesen. In diesem Genre ist das irgendwie, kommt mir das irgendwie vor. Dazu kommt die sachliche Unrichtigkeit. Es ist ein Versuch eines Menschen nach langen Jahren Abschaltung auf einmal irgendwie krampfhaft etwas zusammenzustoppeln und zusammenzubauen, damit es irgendwie zu einem Buch befördert wird.
Ja.
Well, it may be similar, but when I read this whole material here, this looks to me like the letters of Josef Pilzer or some other fairy tale by Ludwig Thoma.
Ludwig Thoma, כן. כן, Ludwig Thoma זה הומוריסט בווארי.
President of court, yes, Ludwig Thoma was a well-known Bavarian humorist. Official interpreter, thank you, sir. The accused continuing, this is a patchwork, and now a big mess of things which they are trying to work into one big whole in order to publish a book about it.
Judge Halevi.
Where
is Günther now?
Das weiß ich nicht, wo sich Günther befindet. Ich habe keinen von den beiden Günthers nach dem...
I asked about this Günther, the man you described.
I do not know where Günther is now. I have not seen either of the two Günthers after the war.
Nach ihm erkundigt, habe aber nirgends eine Auskunft gehört, habe nicht gehört, dass tot ist und habe auch nicht gehört, dass lebt.
I don't know where this Günther is either.
Ich habe nirgends gehört, dass tot ist. Mehr kann ich nicht sagen.
I have repeatedly inquired about his whereabouts, but I have never received a reply. I don't know whether he is dead. I don't know whether he's alive. I never heard anything about him. One can assume that he is alive because I never heard of him dying.
President of court, I have a question to the accused.
Als Sie vorher sagten, das hat man zusammengestoppelt, ja?
You said before
das hat man zusammengestoppelt.
that this was patched together.
Ich weiß, aber das würde auch hinpassen.
Nein, ich habe das Wort von Ihnen gehört.
I heard the word, you said it.
Das stimmt auch nicht.
Okay.
I did not invent the word, I heard
Wer hat
you
das
said
zusammengestoppelt?
Who patched this together?
Von verschiedenen Köchen ist das zusammengestoppelt worden. Ich habe dazu gesagt, Sassen hat dazu etwas gesagt. Die aufnehmende Kraft hat das einfach in die Maschine reingeschrieben. Und so kommt dann zum Schluss so ein Gebilde heraus.
שאלת אב בית הדין, כשאמרת קודם לכן טלאי על גבי טלאי, שאלת הנאשם, טלאי על גבי טלאי, אני זוכר אם בדיוק אמרתי...
I don't remember having used that expression, patchwork.
טלאי על גבי טלאי. מר מימון קורא את המקור, טלאי על גבי טלאי.
Well, if you say, Your Honor, that I used the word, then what I meant to say was that there were many cooks who dealt with this here. I said a few things, then Sassen said other things, then there was the typist who wrote all kinds of things into her typewriter.
Judge Halevi, one more question.
לכך נתקבלה התשובה.
And this is how the whole thing came out.
אני שאלתי אותך על גונטר,
I asked you about Ginter because you rely that he is able to testify to your previous words. You answered that you believe he's alive because you never heard about his death.
Ich kann beides annehmen und dann ist das ebenso mit hineingeschrieben.
Judge Halevi, but when you spoke to Sassen, you took it for granted that he was still alive and that he can come forward and testify.
Ich meine das so, falls er leben würde, würde er das bestätigen müssen.
What I meant was, well, I could assume both possibilities, that he would either be alive or dead. What I wrote then is if he were alive, he could testify and confirm.
Judge Halevi, I thought maybe you had news that the man was still alive.
No, I never had a single bit of news about this.
Judge Halevi, what do you know about Miller, dead or alive?
Ich habe verschiedentlich versucht, mir Gedanken darüber zu machen. Ich wurde auch gefragt deshalb. Ich habe Müller zum letzten Mal gesehen, bevor ich nach Tirol abrücken musste. Ich habe nie wieder etwas gehört. Ich habe Verschiedenes gelesen und habe mir gedacht, dann zum Schluss, dass er in der Reichskanzlei gefallen ist. Das war meine Annahme. In Argentinien hörte ich, dass es möglicherweise so ist, dass Müller nach Russland gegangen sein könnte. Und da wurde ich befragt. Nun habe ich eine völlig unmaßgebliche Meinung, denn ich bin da nicht orientiert, wie sich Müller verhalten hat zur Umsturzzeit, denn da habe ich ihn ja nicht gesehen, sodass ich persönlich nichts weiß. Ich neige aber der Annahme, dass er sich das Leben genommen hat. Wohingegen ich gefragt worden bin von einem Beamten bezüglich Müller, und da habe ich wieder geschlossen, wenn man sich lebhaft nach einer Person erkundigt, vielleicht liegen Indizien vor, dass er doch noch lebt. Das sind meine persönlichen Überlegungen gewesen, die aber auf keine irgendwelche Grundlage basieren können, die von Authentizität wäre.
I tried to think about this whole matter, about Müller, and I have been asked about this more than once. I last saw Müller before I had to knock off in the direction of Tirol. Ever since that time, I never heard anything about him. I read that he may have possibly died in the Reichschancellery. Later on, in Argentina, I read that Müller might have gone to the Soviet Union. And I was asked in Argentina about him. But I cannot say anything definite because I do not know what his attitude, what his thinking was at the time of the uprising. In any event, I never saw him since, and personally I am inclined to believe that he had committed suicide. But then some official asked me about Müller, and from that very question I gathered that someone was still taking an interest in Müller, and this could be taken to mean that people assume him to be still alive. In any event, I only had assumptions and surmises about this, but no factual basis for any information.
Mr. Hausner, the last passage in connection with this chapter on page 223.
President of Court, I thought that was the last one. Mr. Hausner, no, Your Honor, I said 3 and we have only read 2.
Turn to page 223, the last few lines. Look, first, Vislitseni, Abromai and Krumai are discussed on this page. And then you say something about the three of them. Ale dry, you say, the three of them. Will you please read out what you say about these three? At the end of page 223. It is marked. Go on, read out the last few lines beginning with the words Alle diese drei.
Alle diese drei waren das Gegenteil von mir. Friedfertige, gute Bürger. Alle drei waren stolze, fröhliche Uniformträger. Alle drei liebten es nicht allzu sehr, echauffiert zu werden. Sie machten alle gern ihren Dienst, soweit es nicht an Überstunden heranragte. Und alle drei ließen die Fünfe gerade sein, wenn man ihnen nur die persönliche geheiligte Ruhe ließ.
Da.
These three were the opposite from me. They were good, peace-loving citizens. They were jolly, uniform-bearing citizens. None of the three wanted to get too excited about anything. They served willingly, as long as there was no overtime involved. And all three liked everything to be like to leave everything alone if they were left alone.
Judge Halevi, gerade sein is not exactly to be left to themselves. Mr. Hausner, you did say those things or something similar to that.
Ich werde nicht gesagt haben, sind im Gegensatz zu mir friedfertige Bürger, weil ich der Annahme war und bin, dass ich stets ein friedfertiger Bürger gewesen bin.
I don't think I said that they were the opposite of myself, good peace-loving citizens. I always regarded myself as well as a good peace-loving citizen.
Dann hätte ich sicherlich nach Art der Raudis ganz andere Beispiele gegeben, von denen man berichtet haben würde.
Because had I not been a good, peaceful citizen, I would have done something as hooligans and rowdies would do, and there would have been reports about such acts of mine.
But besides the words you take objection to, this reservation, you did say what is written there, the remark
es
by
mag
you.
Sinngemäß richtig sein, ich weiß ja nicht, was ich gesagt habe um jene Zeit.
It could reflect the right contents, but I do not know exactly what I could have said at that period.
Mr. Hausner, the following session will be the chapter about Hungary, and I believe I will conclude today the cross-examination. We shall adjourn. The following session is today at 3:30.